Let's hide this one real quick. Cory, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with us. You mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I go by the name 60-Second Skeptic, which is just about the idea of producing content that's really boiling down skeptical points, methods of sort of thinking and looking at science, reason, logic, and how we can better think about the world. I'm a big fan of boiling down points to like really, really short sentences. So I guess that's why I wanted to ask you today to review and critically analyze some of the videos. Just get your opinion, see if I'm on the right track, and see if everything kind of holds up.
Cool. Let's jump right in and give it a shot. Can we start at the newest or oldest?
I would go from oldest to newest.
All right.
In its simplest form, a skeptic is someone who requires the evidence for a claim to be proportional to the nature of the claim itself before its acceptance. Say, for example, your neighbor tells you they have a pet dog. Okay, all things being equal, we know dogs exist. Pet ownership is legal. People adopt dogs all the time. Given what we already know, it would be reasonable to conclude that your neighbor probably has a pet dog. Sure. Now, what if your neighbor tells you they have a pet fire-breathing dragon? We don't have evidence that fire-breathing dragons exist. That would be an extraordinary claim, which would require extraordinary evidence. If you agree it would be unreasonable to conclude that your neighbor has a pet dragon, congrats, you'd simply be skeptical of that claim and withhold belief until you have good evidence for it. Everyone's skeptical to some degree. The trick to having a healthy sense of skepticism is focusing on the relationship between a claim and the evidence provided for it.
All right. So my first thought is that in philosophy, skepticism is more defined as just rejection of any hypothesis, is saying it's not true. It's not the proportional claims require proportional evidence or whatever the Laplace quote. That's a more specific thing that is outside of the realm of skepticism. But if you use it in like the colloquial context,
More of
you
the
can use
Carl
it that way.
Sagan type definition.
Yeah. So that's like it would might be useful to make a distinction between the philosophical definitions and the colloquial definitions, because people like Steve McRae like the philosophical definitions, and he's going to yell at you for that and say that's not what skepticism is. Just, that would be my only real criticism there.
Mhm.
It would be cool to have the quotes of the different philosophers who have said that kind of stuff. That would make it more authoritative. So I think there's like 4 or 5 philosophers who've all said that, a different version of that argument, that the goal is to have your beliefs be proportional to the evidence. Laplace is the one that just comes to mind. I know I have them saved somewhere, but that would be cool, because I know this kind of format with the dry picture things use a lot of pictures of philosophers with quotes, and it makes it more authoritative. So it would be an option.
That makes sense, yeah. And then reference it in the comments, maybe.
Yeah.
Or the description. Yeah, sure.
Cool. All right, let's go to the next one.
Conspiracy theory is a theory for an event that invokes conspiracy as the most probable explanation. But there's some major problems with that. First of all, any conspiratorial claim can become circular reasoning. In other words, evidence against the conspiracy can be asserted as being part of the conspiracy. And most of these theories are not falsifiable. Otherwise, they'd have been properly investigated and proven. Sure, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but the burden of proof always lies on the claim, not the other way around. Finally, we don't have mass conspiracy theories leading to the exposing of mass conspiracies. History has shown us real-life conspiracies are discovered by serious public investigation, typically with law enforcement involved. They're not exposed beforehand by mysterious internet websites or late-night radio shows. Until a conspiracy is proven and demonstrated, it's simply best to remain skeptical.
All right, so that one I'd say is you'd have to give a definition of what a conspiracy theory is. It seems like, based on the video, what you're implying is that any hypothesis given by news networks or video stations equals conspiracy theory. And so I think you would need to extrapolate on how exactly you define conspiracy theories and to distinguish them from alternative theories. Because it's really hard in that video to establish what exactly you mean by conspiracy theory, other than just anything you don't like or anything that comes from news networks. It seems to be the only way to judge that one.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Be more specific on the actual definition and then move forward.
Yeah, because the main point is people are going to want to be able to distinguish between conspiracy theory versus non-conspiracy theory, to be able to apply your reason. Also, I would say use more upbeat music. Happier music gets more views.
Good to know.
All right, go to the next one.
Here we have 3 jars. One that contains jelly beans, one that's empty with nothing inside, and one that contains supernatural transcendent jelly beans. Now, what if we mix them up? How can we tell what's in each jar? Well, right away we can visually see jelly beans inside this one. We can shake it up and hear sound being produced. We can open it up and physically touch them. We can test and demonstrate that jelly beans are there. But how do we test and measure which jar is empty and which jar has the supernatural transcendent jelly beans? There's no visual distinction between them, no sound, no difference in weight. There's no physical properties for us to test for or measure using equipment. We have no way of testing for the presence of the supernatural jelly beans manifesting. And that's the problem. Until we can distinctly identify something from nothing, then it's the same as nothing. With no measurable properties whatsoever, it's indistinguishable from not existing at all.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I'd say that it would be good to provide an example of like a successful prediction of supernatural claims. So like if you have a supernatural friend named Bob and you pray to Bob and he forgive you a gold brick and a gold brick appears, that would be evidence of the supernatural or something. And so giving a hypothetical example of what might count would be good, because a lot of the theists are going to be like, oh, you just think it's impossible, and so it's doesn't even matter what we provide, you never accept it, kind of a thing. And so giving them a criterion that you would accept would be helpful in that one.
That makes sense. Sure. I mean, a little bit of the challenge is trying to condense it, I should say, to 60 seconds. That's the challenge. Yeah.
Oh, because these are short, you might want to put them into the vertical or whatever, the phone format, because YouTube gives priority to shorts, and so you could probably get several thousand to 10,000 views on each of these.
Wow.
If you just made them into a short.
Gotcha.
All right.
Occam's razor is a problem-solving principle which states that when faced with competing hypotheses, the simplest explanation is more often the correct one, and that you should go with the solution which requires the fewest assumptions. There's many variations, all pointing to the notion that, with all things being equal, simpler theories are more preferable to complex ones. Occam's razor is an important concept within science, as it's helpful for guiding scientists in developing theoretical models. It's important to note that it's not a deciding factor between published models. Think of it more as a technique that's helpful at shaving away what's unnecessary. You want to cut out all the features of a theory that can't be observed, tested, and falsified. It can be applied to everyday life as well. What's more likely? You accidentally dropped your car keys between the cushions of your couch, or it was placed there by secret agents who broke into your house while you were sleeping. At the end of the day, keep it simple until more evidence comes along.
So for this one, there's the part where it says observed, tested, and falsified. Like if you add in properties that can't be observed, tested, or falsified, that's a different thing than simplicity. So you're adding you're definitely adding in complexity, but Occam's razor simply says cut out the things with excess properties of any kind, whether they're observed or not. So if you just add in things with more properties of any kind, and you have a hypothesis with less properties, you prefer the one with less properties, regardless of whether or not they're verified. And so Occam's razor doesn't actually include the criterion of whether or not they're verified properties. That's a different criterion.
Gotcha.
Hanlon's razor is a simple principle that states, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. It's a very useful model when thinking about the actions of others and the intent behind their behavior. While this might just sound like advice you give to your angry friend when they're accidentally cut off in traffic, it can go much deeper. Consider social media, politics, and courtroom cases. Think about the assumptions people make over simple, genuine errors. We know people make mistakes. Being a social species, malice is typically pretty low on the list of explanations for our behavior. Sure, there are times when bad intentions are in fact the explanation. However, if there's no good evidence of actual malicious intent, it's simply more reasonable to err on the side of caution. Assume stupidity, carelessness, or incompetence. Shave off the unnecessary assumptions.
For that one, you should definitely use some examples. The more spicy, the better. So, like, some common examples are the 1350 statistic. African Americans are 13% of the population, but are 50% of the murders. When people say that, they're normally attributed to being a dog whistle to racism or something, but it's just a true statistic. That would be an example. Or when Christians say that, oh, you don't accept evolution because you're just evil or whatever, you're working for the devil, that's another one. Or any of those kinds of examples, anything that would help people understand the context of the argument, because most people, when they hear Hellman's razor, they don't understand when it should be applied. That's the tough thing. That's most of my debates on social justice are related to Hellman's razor and people just saying anybody who says this sentence is evil, regardless of context.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Say you're in a purportedly haunted house, and as you walk around, the lights begin to flicker. Someone suggests that it's being done by ghosts or spirits. Well, we know lights can flicker due to faulty wiring and circuits. Even if it seems like an unlikely coincidence, we still need to consider what we already know about the natural world before we jump to conclusions. Also consider that strange occurrences are often multiple events occurring in concert, but give the illusion that it's one single cause. Things like misidentification, coincidence, mass hysteria, suggestion, hallucination, misinterpretation, and yeah, even a few people lying, when all mixed together, can produce a seemingly mysterious event. Always ask yourself, have we truly eliminated all natural explanations? Because when we look at debunked paranormal claims of the past, they all simply fail to fully explore that question.
Yeah, for that one, I'd probably add a sentence like anything this paranormal can explain, the unknown natural can also explain, or something like that. That's a good one. Be more concrete about it, because most people who claim things about the paranormal think that they can't be explained by the natural claim. So making the universal statement like anything the paranormal could explain, the unknown natural can also explain, would help strengthen your point on that one.
Yeah, I guess sometimes when it comes to paranormal claims, I find there tends to be a differentiation, between supernatural and paranormal. They don't necessarily overlap, but I know what you mean, like try and establish that sort of broader scope, like how we're thinking about the actual way of exploring it, as far as it being, how did you put it, natural versus
Unknown natural.
unknown
So
natural? Okay.
Usually the way I define natural versus supernatural is supernatural is a mind of some kind, interaction, governing things in the universe, as opposed to unguided forces, and natural is unguided forces. And so in the case of paranormal, they usually also include minds as the source. And so natural in this context would just be like a law of physics of some kind.
Mm.
Also, back in your conspiracy theory video, you mentioned something about evidence being able to, that is against the hypothesis that they use to justify the hypothesis or boost their belief in the hypothesis. You might want to mention that's confirmation bias, or make a video on confirmation bias if you haven't already.
Oh, it's coming up.
Gotcha. All right.
Here's a few basic tricks to help weed out unreliable media sources. First off, serious journalists don't make short, conclusory opinions, or worse, defer to conspiracy. Hearing things like,
"The media has it all wrong,"
is often a red flag. Same with outlets that preface their reports with,
"We know the real truth."
A reliable news source shouldn't put the burden of proof on the listener either. Questions like,
Can we really know what truly happened?
should set off an alarm, because news outlets should be answering questions, not asking them. They should never ask you to prove a negative either, so phrases like,
No one has proven X was not involved.
is also a big red flag. Another thing to watch out for is the elevation of one individual against the entire consensus of their field. Finally, never let a news outlet claim censorship is proof of their credibility. That's backwards, and at the very least should give you pause to remain skeptical.
For those, I'd say most of those are like not indicative of any like wrongdoing in those cases. Those statements could be true or could be false. And so I don't think simply hearing those statements indicates that a site is unreliable in any way. It's just a common collection of words that makes people emotionally engaged. So I don't know if I would agree with that one. I'd say that simply trying to make a generalization based on that collection of sentences would not be a reliable way to establish whether or not what they're saying is true.
Yeah, I was looking at it more like trying to build up symptoms that you could use to almost diagnose something, where you're noticing patterns in a news source that typically, not always, but typically often lead to a unreliable news source, a conspiratorial, far extremist sort of thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think these are symptoms. I think these are just unrelated things. They're symptoms of something else that has nothing to do with the truth or reliability of the media claim. Those sentences that you listed are symptoms of how to get views and clicks, not symptoms of truth or falsity of the media source. And so even if a source has good information, they're still going to use the same sentences because it's engaging for people. And so I don't think those sentences that you listed would actually be indicative of an unreliable source. They're not symptoms of an unreliable source. They're symptoms of people who want to get views.
Gotcha.
Also, I want to comment again that the music definitely should make it something upbeat. Upbeat gets a lot more clicks and views. Something happy.
Interesting. How did you I'm getting some feedback here.
Oh, it's because I have the video up. So go ahead.
I'll just ask it really quick. How did you pick your music? I'm just always curious when people make a YouTube channel and you got the drums on the intro. Just curious how you picked it.
Made by a viewer.
Cool.
So I pretty much all my stuff is made by viewers, and they pick it.
All right.
You've probably heard the phrase, correlation does not imply causation. But what does that mean exactly? In simple terms, it means that just noticing a pattern does not mean the pattern is the cause behind something occurring. Say, for example, we find a pattern showing that people who jog have higher rates of skin cancer. Without exploring that further, you might conclude jogging causes cancer.
So for this one, there's a really common example people use, which is the rate of pirate ships and global warming. The less pirate ships there are, the more global warming there is.
Yeah.
It's funny examples do better for views and engagement. So picking a funny example as much as possible, especially one just mentioning pirate ships is always a good example. So the funnier the example you can do, the better. And especially if there's one that's really common in the field, then like if other people making videos on this are going to mention a common thing used in the field, which is better, you should probably do it too. Picking a less interesting example would not necessarily be good because people would prefer the other videos that are more funny.
Sure. Makes sense.
But what if it's actually the fact that the people in your data pool who jog more are also outside more and receiving high levels of sun exposure? It would be a mistake to conclude that it was the act of jogging itself that caused skin cancer. To minimize this problem, we use controlled experiments with randomization and predictive models with multiple variables. The more complex a problem is, the more important it is to run through controlled scientific testing. A placebo is an intervention or treatment that has no actual effect on the body, except to convince you that it does. Examples include sugar or water pills and saline injections. Now, placebos have no direct impact on a disease, however, they can have significant effects on the way a patient feels. Perceived feelings like pain, nausea, depression, and stress are all things that can be potentially influenced by a placebo. Typically, they're designed to resemble an active medication or therapy, so it functions as a control within a double-blind study or trial. You want to verify that your medication has actual therapeutic value and works better than a pretend medication. Some illnesses are affected by perceived stress and pain, so it can get complicated. Just know that the placebo effect is an important consideration when thinking about how we can test and verify the efficacy of a medical treatment.
For that one, I think you didn't go into enough information about what a placebo is. So you probably have to explain that placebo is like a sugar pill. They're just giving you a pill of sugar, which will not have any effect, but there is an effect. We do measure an effect, and that effect comes from things like lowering stress level. And lowering stress level will, when you're stressed, it disables your immune system, and so when you lower stress, it helps your immune system to function, which can then cure you of diseases, or things like the hospital study that shows that if there's people on a side of a hospital that faces a parking garage versus people on the side of a hospital facing a park, and people on the park side will heal faster, same kind of thing. So you'd probably want to explain more about what a placebo is, and the fact that there are the feelings, because they have an impact, can make it seem like a medication is working. If you just gave the medication to a group, they could start feeling better, and it could just be because of the placebo effect. Therefore, you want to have a placebo group to be able to measure that, what percentage of people get better just from that versus the drug. So I think it's based on your explanation, it wasn't clear enough what a placebo is and why people test for it, unless you already have the background information. So you might want to explain that one more.
Sure. I think I did say pretend medication and saline injections. I don't know if you think something more specific would be a little more helpful.
Yeah, so if people don't have the background information of what any of that means, they're not going to get what a placebo is or why it's important. I mean, the key factor here is that if you give someone a drug, they can get better for the reason of the drug or because of the placebo effect. The placebo effect can make people better. And so in order to know if the drug works, you have to be able to measure how much the placebo effect is affecting people as opposed to the effects of the drug. And that's the part I don't think you explained as clearly.
Sure. Gotcha.
Simply put, falsifiability is the capacity for a claim or proposition to be proven wrong. It's an essential part of science, as falsifiability is just about synonymous with testability. If you want to test a hypothesis as true, you have to know what it would look like if the hypothesis wasn't true. The scientific method isn't so much about proving theories, but rather disproving them. Say, for example, someone claims they have an invisible and intangible dragon in their garage. Well, there's no way you could disprove that claim, as you can't see it, touch it, test for, or measure its existence. You can't disprove that claim, nor can you prove it. It's both unfalsifiable and unverifiable. Technically, there's nothing you can do with that claim at all. It's useless. If something can't be falsified, it can't be tested or considered to be scientific.
Well, so that part I would say is false. Like you mentioned the difference between unfalsifiability versus unverifiability. Those aren't the same thing. So you can verify things that that are unfalsifiable at the same time. And so simply being unfalsifiable doesn't make it non-scientific. There are many different versions of scientific models that are unfalsifiable but can still be verified, because those are two separate criterion. So I would disagree with the last sentence. Falsifiability is one of the criterions of science, but it's not the only one, and you don't require falsifiability for scientific testing. The Popper model of simply falsifiability wasn't really accepted by science, and it requires a more thorough set of principles in addition to that. That one on its own isn't good enough.
Okay.
coincidence is a remarkable occurrence of events that have no apparent causal connection between them. Coincidences are statistically inevitable. We just label them as coincidence when they have a very low chance of occurring. The important thing to consider is whether or not we can really figure out the cause and effect behind what occurred. Just because we notice a pattern doesn't mean we understand the cause behind it, especially if it's nearly impossible to calculate the probability of it happening. Coincidences do occur in life. Flip a quarter 1,000 times in a row, and you're bound to notice interesting patterns. The way we tell the difference between a meaningfully caused event versus random coincidence is through controlled testing with future predictive models. Even in day-to-day life, never just assume the cause behind an event. You want to eliminate personal biases and assumptions that can lead you to flawed and biased conclusions.
Yeah, examples would be super helpful on this one. It doesn't just saying coincidence. It doesn't give anybody anything to relate to, and you need something to help have them relate to for them to really have it be a meaningful conversation with them of what you're talking about. And so giving examples would be super helpful.
I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the
Oh, one sec. I'll mute the.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I wanted to go into the quarter example a little bit more and say, like, you keep flipping, eventually you're going to get like heads, or tails, in it, or bizarre patterns that you would find, which aren't really bizarre. It's just statistically probable. Again, the whole 60-second boiling it down to that 1 minute is a little bit tricky. But I hear you. Yeah, better example. Trying to fit a deeper example in there would probably be a good thing.
One trick you can use is you can just speed up your voice too. You can just play it at a faster rate.
Yeah.
It's actually been shown to be good and helpful and more intellectual in a lot of ways. And so some videos do that just as a tactic, not because to try and fit information. It's just a way to make it sound smarter. So you can speed up your voice, make it a little higher pitch, and it improves things a bit.
Okay, good to know.
Which one? Coincidence.
How do you tell the difference between a bunch of random sticks and mud naturally piled up in a river versus a dam created by a beaver? Well, you'd have to reference it with other beaver dams where you'd learn the trademark signs of the animal to distinguish it from a naturally occurring dam. What if you came across those sticks and mud for the first time with no knowledge as to what a beaver or animal even was? In order to distinguish something created versus something naturally occurring, we have to have some sort of a reference. Otherwise, there's no way to tell. Some things have the appearance of design even though it's naturally occurring. Take the universe, for example. Some might claim it's designed with agency, but how many universes do we have to reference it to? If we only have this one universe, then we can't claim it to have been designed because we have no naturally occurring alternate universe to contrast it with. And without that, how do you demonstrate design?
On that one, I'd say that it's partially right. Like, I don't think the number of universes doesn't really make a difference there. It's not really like we're comparing one universe to another universe. It's more like if I see a BMW for the first time and I know a guy named Bob who makes BMWs, I can say, yeah, the BMW was made by Bob, even though I only have one, because I know the designer. And so the thing we need to contrast to is knowing something that can produce the thing we're looking at, whether it's a source of a mind or a source of a force. And so in order to conclude whether or not something was designed, we would need information about the source. And if we don't have any information about the source, we can't conclude it was designed. But the argument most design proponents are going to make is some argument from analogy, like it looks like human design. Like we found a spaceship with a joystick and a seat in it, we probably conclude it was designed by something like a human because it has features that humans use in it. And so it would be rational to conclude a spaceship was designed by aliens, even though we've never come across a spaceship before, and even though we've never come across aliens. And that's fine. The faulty analogy is when they try to make the same argument for the universe or something. And what they're saying is an argument for design is the complexity or some kind of abstract numerical analysis of what the relation between the forces are or something, which is just nothingness. That's just irrelevant. There's no way to simply go by some kind of mathematical improbability number based on analysis to include, oh, it must be design. That doesn't make any sense. So I would probably want to use a good argument from design, like saying a spaceship, and oh, look, it has a seat and a joystick, therefore it's probably made by something like a human, versus we look at a solar system or a galaxy or a universe and say, there's no seat, there's no joystick, there's no labeling, nothing's there, there's no code. It's just, you're just looking at some kind of abstract mathematical model and trying to infer that this complex mathematical system equals design when it doesn't, because you can get complex mathematical systems out of anything, including nature, which is why you get there's those spiral, the golden ratio things in nature. And so just looking at cool patterns in nature doesn't equal design. Whereas if you actually had like a spaceship with the joystick and a seat, you could infer design, even though you knew nothing about the designer and nothing about, you had no other examples. And so it would be helpful to explain good examples of design versus bad examples of design, because you can actually make design arguments without evidence of alternatives.
So, I mean, even with like a spaceship and joystick example, we couldn't. We are still referencing that to other things around us that are not designed in that way, right? That's I guess where I'm a little bit confused. Like, what can we say is designed and have a sample set of one? I'm trying. I can't think of anything like.
Well, no, so we know some things are designed like chairs and joysticks. We design chairs and joysticks. So if it has a chair and joystick in the UFO, we can say, even though we have no examples of other UFOs, we can say, oh, look, because we design chairs and joysticks and it has a chair and a joystick, it's rational to conclude it was designed because this is something that we only see being made for the purposes of human or human-like usage. And so if it has an analogy to human design, then it's rational. The argument would be is like, what is the analogy to human design that the universe or laws of physics have? If the laws of physics like literally spelled out a word or something, then that you could possibly argue that was design. That would be a rational argument. But there are ways to conclude design without having prior examples if you can make an analogy to the design that we do have of human design. And so it's completely rational to see like discover some kind of pyramid for the first time and say this was probably man-made, like even though we've never seen any pyramids before, first pyramid discovered in Egypt or whatever, like yeah, we can conclude that was man-made. This is probably made by some kind of a culture of some kind.
But I mean, we would have to differentiate between the way it's designed and the natural rocks forming around it that could have the element, that could have the appearance that it's sort of designed, like say a cave or something where we can look at it and have to determine whether or not this was carved out by somebody or whether or not it just happened to form naturally. Don't we need that contrast, or is that not necessary?
Yeah, it's all based on prior information. So if we have prior information of a natural force that can accomplish what we're looking at, it's rational to conclude it was done by a natural force. If we have an example of a mind designing something similar, then it's rational to conclude a mind did it. So like again, if we found something like a spaceship with a joystick and a chair in it, and we have no examples of anything else from space, no spaceships or whatever, it's pretty rational to say, yeah, this was made for the purposes of a bipedal form of some kind, because they're so divorced from anything we know occurring in nature. We have no natural physical forces that we know can do that, but we do know of mental forces that can design a joystick. And so it is rational to conclude there are some things that we see in nature that we don't know of any natural forces that can produce it, but we do know of mental forces or mental minds that do it. And so it would be rational to conclude it was designed like a spaceship if we found it and it looked like a human spaceship.
Reference to the human spaceships we have, right? I guess that's why I'm confused, because if we don't have that, like say, I guess my analogy is my example is if we don't know what a spaceship even is, we don't have tools, we don't have joysticks, we don't have anything man-made, and we just have that sample set of one. How do you conclude then, therefore, it must be designed?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. Like sample set of one.
Like with one universe, right?
Well, the number doesn't make a difference here. What matters is what comparison are making in the properties of that one thing, and do the properties of that one thing match on to the properties of other design things. And
Mhm.
so, like, if the universe had like a factory setting to it where it was literally set up in a line or something, and it spelled out words in the sky or whatever, and all the stars were in the specific pattern of just the Bible. Like literally, if we found the stars, all of the stars in the universe were just literally spelled out in the Bible, line by line. We could conclude it was design. We have one. We only have one universe, but because there's a strong correlation between biblical texts and the shape of the stars in the universe, we can say, yeah, there's a property there that's the same. It's rational to conclude the universe was designed. So simply the fact that there's only one doesn't mean you can't conclude it's designed, because if there's a strong enough property that's the same between like the universe, like if the stars were literally just shaped in the shape of the biblical text of the entire Bible or whatever, then yeah, you could conclude it was design. Like that's completely rational. And so it's the number of alternatives isn't what matters there. It's more, does it have a similar property between other things we know that are designed?
Hmm. Okay, I'll have to think about that one. I'm thinking, like, could people not look at constellations and say, well, look, teach them evidence of design. We have this and this constellation and this design. Or obviously, I know that that's just interpretation and
Well, yeah, constellations, there's enough stars that you can find patterns in the infinite amount of stars and
right.
probabilistic terms. But literally, if all of the stars literally just spelled out Bible words and nothing else, there was no extra stars on the right, like you would probably say, okay, that's probably designed, right? You wouldn't just be like random chance. You'd like,
Mm,
no, probably designed. Like that would be a rational inference to make, wouldn't it, from
sure.
your perspective?
I suppose it would. Yeah, sure.
So there are
It
some
would.
things we can see in the universe that even if we had no other examples of universes, even if we didn't know anything about the God potentially, we could make a inference that yeah, this looks designed.
Mhm.
And so there are some cases of design that are legitimate where abstracted, like you mentioned, like the constellations or things, those would not be legitimate
Mhm.
arguments for design, because it's just we don't know um, the abstract number comparison between things isn't a strong correlation.
Gotcha.
I'd probably put this part at the very first part of the video. So like, um, oh, I accidentally muted it. I forgot to unmute it, but um, that part with the goblins should be the very beginning, because I think that it's an easy thing people can relate with. Simply explaining it is what should come second. Use the example first.
Gotcha.
A burden of proof is the responsibility or onus to provide sufficient evidence to support a claim. In other words, you make a claim, you gotta back it up. It's a fundamental principle within courts of law, philosophy, and basic skepticism. A problem that can sometimes occur is when someone making a claim attempts to shift the burden of proof. Say, for example, someone claims goblins exist, and when you ask them for proof, they reply that you need to prove goblins don't exist. Now that's backwards and fallacious, because they're the ones making a claim, not you. Never let anyone making a claim shift that onus and responsibility, or try to navigate around that burden of proof with special pleading. This becomes even more important when there's little to no precedence behind what they're claiming. Failure to fulfill a burden of proof should always set off red flags and leave you highly skeptical of a claim.
Yeah, so the only one on that one, I think it would be better to put the goblins first. Goblins are a good example of something to do. Using the example first to get people to think about it, and then explaining the example is a more compelling way to express ideas rather than starting with the explanation.
That's probably a good idea. Noted.
All right.
The scientific method is the process of objectively establishing facts with testing and experimentation. No, it's not a person, laboratory, or university. It's a method and way of testing and learning about reality. How does it work? Well, it starts with an observation, then moves to a hypothesis, which is a prediction based on observations and existing information. Novel testable predictions are an important part of the process, along with making sure that you're testing a falsifiable claim. You'd then perform replicable experiments and run models to test that prediction and analyze the data to find patterns which may or may not connect important variables. At that point, you want to draw a conclusion and try and have your findings published. Science is the gold standard as to how we arrive at new knowledge and update our previous understanding of the world around us.
So for that one, you probably want to mention something about peer review. Peer review would be important and why it's required.
I think that's the next one. There's like two more, I think.
Well, that's a part of the scientific method, because there isn't one scientific method. There's many scientific methods. That's another thing you might want to mention for prosperity's sake. The Steve McRae types are going to yell at you for that one. But there were a lot more features of the scientific method that you left out that you would be really important to include, like publication. It's not really about publication. It's about having peer reviews to test your ideas after you publish them. That's what you want. That's why you're trying to get it published. It's not just an authority that you want to get to accept your document. And because you didn't explain that, it would be harsh. Also, you don't really need falsifiability. Again, that's not one of the required principles of a scientific method. It's something people think it is because of Popper's falsifiability, but modern science doesn't use that as the end all be all.
Gotcha.
In the world of science, peer review is the process of subjecting methods and findings to scrutiny by other experts within that same field. It's an essential part of publishing discoveries in scientific journals because it helps weed out flawed experiments and invalid conclusions. Many peer-reviewed submissions get rejected, with the most respected journals publishing only a small fraction of submissions. In some cases, they may not even make it past the editor. The majority of peer review is done single-blind, where you don't even know who the person reviewing it is. This helps reviewers make decisions without influence of the author. Anybody can self-publish a book or document. However, in science, there's a direct incentive to debunk and disprove findings before they get published. This helps keep scientific discoveries held to the absolute highest standards possible.
So for this one, I think like the main benefit of peer review is the idea that everybody has their own ideas and they want everyone else's ideas to be false. And so if you have an idea that's good enough that everyone else is trying to prove it false but can't, that's why it's a good method, is that everyone is competing against one another and they want your ideas to be false. And so peer review is the idea that they're trying to destroy your ideas as much as possible, and they only let the ones through that they can't destroy because they want their ideas to be true and yours to be false, and that's what makes it successful. And that you didn't really add that in there, which would be important since that's the main function of peer review.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Also,
to put it.
they're double blind, not single blind. Like most academic journals do double blind, so you don't put your name on any of the papers you write. It's just a number. If you submit a paper and then the people reviewing it don't know who you are and you don't know who they are, so it's usually double blind.
Is it? I read up that it was currently it's mostly single blind as opposed to double. I don't know. I'll have to double check that statistic. Overall,
Not in the journals that I've worked with. Like they're double blind. Philosophy ones at least are all double blind. The big ones.
Okay. I also I wanted to add something about science being built up on previous science, but again, a lot of this stuff is left out just because of time, the 60-second limit. But I'll also take into consideration speeding it up, talking faster, speeding up the voice. All good suggestions.
Yeah, make them YouTube shorts. Make them all like
Sure.
YouTube shorts. That'll
Yep.
be.
Simply put, confirmation bias is when we ignore information that doesn't already fit with our current beliefs while favoring information that does. It's usually the result of having personal or emotional investment in a desired outcome. It's a type of cognitive bias also known as my side bias and the file drawer effect. Now, every single person has biases. However, this can lead to systemic errors in our thinking and judgment. Just because we want something to be true doesn't mean that it is true.
So part of this would be to include that confirmation bias is the fact that if you receive disconfirming evidence, you'll actually make it fit your model and make it seem like it's confirmatory evidence. So that it's just confirmation bias is just the tendency to make information fit your model. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It might be something different. I don't remember. The one where you have information that goes against you and it makes you more confident in your belief. I'm pretty sure that's confirmation bias, but maybe I'm wrong. But anyway.
The way we overcome this problem is by acknowledging and separating desired outcomes when searching for and interpreting information. It also helps to have multiple parties researching and processing data. Being as unbiased as possible is a core principle within both scientific research and everyday critical thinking.
Somebody in the chat asked me to explain double blind versus single blind. So single blind is when you don't know, or the one side of the person doing the reviewing doesn't know who the other side is. Double blind is when neither person doing the reviewing knows who the other person is. So if you write a paper and submit it, and the person knows who you are, the person who's reviewing your paper knows who you are, you're blind, but they're not. Or if they don't know who you are, but you know who they are, that's single blind. So only one side of the relationship is blind. Double blind is you don't know who they are, they don't know who you are, nobody knows what's going on. It's just looking at the information completely independent of whoever the names on the piece of paper. That's the difference. But yeah, I think that was the last one.
Yep.
I think that's it. Was there any other questions you had?
Yeah. Was there any issues with that particular video that you saw?
I'm pretty sure confirmation bias is the one where you take disconfirming evidence and use it to make you more confident in your belief. You might want to check that just to be sure. But if it is, you would want to include that because that would disagree with what you said in the intro. It's not simply only looking at information that agrees with you, but it's also looking at information that disagrees with you and making you more confident in your position or whatever. And so that would be a thing to include. But other than that, I think it was fine.
Cool. Yeah, just one or two quick questions because I know we're probably closing in on the hour limit out here. So what other broad topics do you think might work concept-wise? I'm planning on doing some stuff on Barnum effect, Barnum statements, relating it to horoscopes, and just any ideas like that that you think would be beneficial.
Yeah, the best thing to do is essentially just be copy other sites, other YouTube channels that do something similar, because you can just find what they do successfully, find the videos that they do that are most popular, essentially copy them. That's the best way to do it. Or look at the analytics, because YouTube gives you a analytics thing somewhere in the bottom of people who view your content and what other similar channels they view, and you can find what those channels do and what they're successful at. And so copying the most popular things is usually the best way to start until you start to grow enough to be able to generate your own model method. So there's another philosophy guy who does something similar. I forgot his name though. But he does little short videos on philosophy, and he has like 100,000 or 50 to 100,000 subscribers, but I can't remember his name.
Cool. That's cool. Yeah, I'm not really trying to necessarily grow the channel. I just want to get like This is more for just people I know in my day-to-day life. I'm trying to forward them information in like really quick ways. Yeah, I mean, the goal isn't necessarily to grow the channel or anything. Honestly, it's just to try and get the best arguments boiled down in the best of way. Hence why I'm talking to you, right? Like that's the whole point today. Um, yeah. So, but
That would be contingent on the kind of people you know and what arguments would most benefit them.
a lot of conspiracy theorists, people into supernatural belief systems, paranormal claims, et cetera, et cetera.
So then,
Yeah,
have you seen the Richard Dawkins documentary on those kinds of claims? Richard Dawkins did a documentary where he was talking about dowsing, and they had dowsers who thought they could identify water, and so they took a bucket and then put water. They had 10 buckets and put water underneath 3 of them, and tested to see if that
was
dowser
this
could actually.
James Randi,
I
or
think James Randi did
I know
one
he
too.
did one. I know for sure.
But yeah, so I would like just go through that video and use clips, and you can use examples of each of the important ones, and that would be a great way to do it.
That's a good idea.
And that's the best way I've had to convince people who are conspiracy theorists, who I know personally, not on YouTube, was to actually like test their ideas in that way of take 10 buckets, put water in it, like, okay, let's see if you can do it. And that lowers their confidence in their belief most of the time, but some of them are affected by confirmation bias. But that's the best way, is just to get them to test their ideas. The differentiate imagination from reality quote is really helpful there.
Street epistemology too, I'd imagine. Yeah, I have one last question, which is, I'm not sure if there's an official name for it, but one argument I've heard you give that was really interesting is the idea behind an intelligently designed universe, in that we see a logical procession in regards to how things are coming to be. So, for example, I think you said it's going to start off with physics, then we get biology, or chemistry, then biology, and then consciousness is dead last at the bottom. Does that argument have a name? Is that created? Did you come up with that, or is that something that?
No, it's something I just made up on the fly in a
Really?
debate against idealism. So it's like the debate. I've debated against like 10 or 12 different idealists, panpsychists, and trying to understand what the debate was about. It's simply just a way to summarize the main disagreement in the debate, which is there's this hierarchy of stuff in the universe. It's like quantum fields, physics, chemistry, biology, brains. And then we want to know, does consciousness go before the quantum field, or does it go after the brains? Where is consciousness found? And that's just a way to summarize the main debate between physicalists versus dualists and idealists and panpsychists. That's just a summary of the debate.
If I give you credit, do you mind if I try and make a video on that?
Sure, go for it.
Cool.
It's Carneades. Carneades.org is the YouTuber I was thinking of. That's right, Jay Verjara. He's the guy who does very similar stuff to what you're doing. He's a good person to get inspiration from.
Cool. All right, I guess that's about it. And just in case some people in chat were wondering, I specifically asked you to be as harsh and critical as possible when reviewing these videos. So if anybody's wondering, that's why I want to get it, a real deep dive and audit on any little issue. And I appreciate that, T-Jump. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, also the positive music thing, super helpful. Like if people are in a happy mood, they're more likely to believe stuff. And so if the music that you play is very dark and it seems like attacky, feels like you're in a horror movie kind of a thing, which is
Really?
puts people in a defensive state of mind, so they're less likely to be open to the information. And so having positive, upbeat music is super helpful if you want more people to take it seriously and not doubt it immediately.
That's an easy fix too.
Cool.
Gotcha.
Do you want to give links to people for your channel? What is your channel called?
On YouTube, 60 Second Skeptic. That's it.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.